That was Crew 4. And you might remember last week, Crew 5 actually launched from Kennedy Space Center. This is Crew 4 returning to Earth now. And the splashdown looks to be just about to take place. Must have been a little...
Beautiful.
There we go. You can hear the applause at NASA. That's the most important part. I guess going to space, quite important too.
Of course.
Returning safely, which is what you just saw. Those were live pictures from NASA of the SpaceX Crew Dragon capsule that just splashed down. This was a 4-person crew that departed from the International Space Station around noon Eastern time for its return to Earth. And that was delayed because of bad weather in the splashdown.
Come in, but overall some spot rain still possible even for southwest Florida and also the northern tier of the country. A taste of winter for you.
A big time, an appetizer of winter, you could call it. We had measurable snow, up to a few inches of snow across the upper Midwest. Also behind that powerful front, very dry air, gusty conditions. That's been kicking up the fire weather conditions. Warnings up for 12 states, unfortunately, across the middle of the country.
Now it's time for the Advisory at 5 with Bryan Norcross.
Hi, everybody, and good afternoon and happy Friday. We're going to talk about a lot of things this afternoon, and we're going to do it on Fox Weather, and we're going to do it live on Facebook, both on my Facebook page and on the Fox Weather Facebook page and on the Fox Weather YouTube channel. So if you have any questions, either about the tropics in general, about Hurricane Ian, Karl is just about done, but if you have any questions at all, or about the weather that's going on that Ian Oliver and Bridget Mahoney are going to talk about, then just go on over to Facebook or YouTube and you can send in the questions and we'll try and answer them for you a little later on here in this half hour. We're going to talk a lot about the change of the season because we have both things going on. We have tropical weather, the last days of Tropical Storm Karl, and we have the leaves changing in the north. You see there in the upper left. We have rain in the northeast. We have snow up in the upper tier of states, and we have very heavy rain in South Florida in a few spots, although nothing like in Miami yesterday. As I look out of Miami Beach today, I can actually see out to the ocean here, where yesterday it was all obscured by heavy rain and fog. All right, let's take a look at the new advisory just in from the National Hurricane Center on what is still Tropical Storm Karl. I thought this would be a tropical depression looking at the satellite picture, but as they said at the Hurricane Center, they're generously carrying it with still 40-mile-an-hour winds. Hurricane hunters have been out there looking around, and boy, there is not much left of the storm. Moving to the south-southwest, and now it's beginning a turn more in this direction, and I'll show you why in just a second. That's been a big debate in the computer forecast models. Pressure's coming up as the system is weakening, and that trend is expected to continue. So we'll have lots more. I'll take a look at that in detail, what's going on across the tropics in just a moment. But now let's go to Ian and Bridget. So Bridget's going to take over, and we'll talk about some snow in the forecast for some parts of the northern tier states.
Into tomorrow, some areas where we saw the snow earlier today could see some more snow. Thanks, Bryan. Of course, let's get to that forecast. This is a look at what they saw waking up early this morning. A lot of people looking out the window saying, hey, I'm going to need to scrape the windshield this morning. Well, probably not needing to get the scraper out, just the windshield wipers do the trick this morning. That's where we saw some pretty big flakes flying. This was enough snow, I think people excited for it. We're happy to see it, and also enough snow that people who hate the snow were bothered enough by this system. This is a look at the radar loop over the last 12 hours, and you can see the spin. This is the finality of it. There you see, though, early this morning, 6, 7, 8 a.m. this morning, that's where we saw quite a bit of widespread blue on the map from Fargo down through eventually Minneapolis, and now sliding off to the east into portions of Green Bay. It looks like it's remaining mainly as some very cold rain showers right now for Green Bay. But check this out. This is a look at some of the tallies as people were likely bringing out the rulers if they could find them in the house. This is what they measured. Proctor, Minnesota, 3 inches. Moose Lake, also 2.5, a little over 2.5 inches there in Duluth, Minnesota. A bit lower as you head off to the south and west from some of those points. Here's a look widespread through the Twin Cities. Minneapolis, 0.5 inch. North St. Paul, 1.2 inches. Nothing to overall create headlines, especially as we head later into the month. This all a distant memory by December and January. At that point, we'll say what we were excited over 1.5 inches. But we do have to say it is the first snow of the season, so a lot of people are excited about it.
I wonder because this is for a lot of folks your favorite time of the year. It's foliage season, fall. It's some of the best temperatures. Maybe not
We're
so much.
skipping over it for some.
Yeah, and it's all because of that powerful area of low pressure. This whole storm system that we've been talking about, which is related to that was a double barrel area of low pressure. This was the cold front associated with it. We saw what this did up and down the eastern seaboard yesterday. All the rain down in Florida. Bryan mentioned the conditions down in Miami. We saw flooding there yesterday. And that wasn't unique just to Florida, unfortunately. We saw up through the mid-Atlantic and the Northeast heavy rain that fell, and it's still falling across parts of the Northeast, namely in Maine, along and out ahead of this front. Places like Bangor, Maine, getting in on these pockets of heavier rain that continue. Portland still reporting some showers. These temperatures are still in the low and mid 60s. But look at some of these storm reports coming out of Maine. Mount Vernon, 3.5 inches. Cumberland, 3.4 inches. Most of these somewhere in that 3 to 4 inch rain. These are areas that do need rain, but this is probably on the high end of what most folks were looking for. Clayton Lake, look at that gust up to 45 miles per hour, 35 miles per hour in Rockland. So yeah, it is not a nice finish to your work week. It's Friday, thankfully, but you've got rain and gusty conditions. Those wind gusts leading to significant power outages in Maine. Look at this, 54.3 thousand customers without power at this point, and you do see most of it across southern and western parts of Maine. So we'll be watching for that. Thankfully, conditions do get a bit better slowly as we move into the weekend, and Future Track does show you that. Most of the rain is done by the time folks wake up on Saturday morning. My assumption is that folks sleep in a little bit later on Saturday. Yeah, by daybreak, it's getting better, and you do see the sunshine breaking out. That's nice. You got sunshine, New York to Boston with high temperatures right around 70. Look at this in Montcalm, New Hampshire. There's the Connecticut River right here. So we're in New Hampshire. We're not far from places like White River Junction in Vermont. Look at the rain gauge there, 2.11 inches of rain. This is a driving range. Bridget, I think it would be tough to find a better driving range than this when you're talking about the foliage you can see off on the horizon, especially when you look at how we're doing with the foliage near peak to peak in some of these areas.
Maybe you need to skip sleeping in and wake up early for that tea time there in New Hampshire. Let's take a look down south, of course, Fort Myers, Florida. That's where you can see the sunshine there trying to peek through. Some lower clouds creating for some showers around Fort Myers. We know this area well over the last couple of weeks. That's because of Hurricane Ian that made landfall as a Category 4 storm just north of Fort Myers. But some of the biggest impacts were in this area from Fort Myers to Sanibel Island, where we saw that big push of storm surge. We're seeing some spot rain. I think Fort Myers just off to the south, right along I-75, a spot rain shower. Very, very light. I don't think it's overall halting any of the recovery efforts, but if you hear any of those rumbles of thunder, make sure it does. You want to get inside right away, but you can work through just the light garden variety showers that are still possible through the evening. You continue to see this all in association with that cold front. You can see where the frontal system is hanging out through tonight, even into tomorrow. That's where we see these rain showers from West Palm Beach to Port St. Lucie, off to the west towards Fort Myers, maybe even Naples as well. It won't be all day rain into your Saturday. You will work in some dry time, so that will be nice for many areas. But down through the Keys, maybe a few spotty showers still possible as the frontal system will finally clear some of these areas as we head into the late portion of the weekend. So a lot going on in this area, of course, all because of Hurricane Ian that struck a couple of weeks ago. And Bryan, we'll send it back to you for a look at the tropics.
Thank you, Bridget. Yeah, yes, when a front comes through here and it's this kind of weak front, the winds go to the northeast to come off the ocean, so we can still get showers behind the front. But Ian, we started to talk about this yesterday as a former Florida guy, and the pronunciation of where Karl is there, the Bay of Campeche or the Bay of Campeche?
When I was in Florida, to be perfectly honest, Bryan, everyone said Campeche. I was told that it's Campeche, so I amended my pronunciation of it. I think it's a little bit of a tomato, but I believe it's Campeche. That's the long and the short of it. Well, it would be
Campeche. Yeah, it would be La Ciudad de Campeche in Spanish. It's funny. I mean, we say Paris, we don't say Paris, right?
True.
The French say Paris. So sometimes we change the pronunciation, and sometimes
I worked in Kentucky, and there was a place pronounced Versailles in Woodford County, Kentucky. So as far as pronunciations go, you tell me.
Yeah, Cairo, Georgia, and Omega, Georgia, and lots of crazy places. That's right. All right. Thanks, guys. All right, let's take a look at what's going on across the tropics. And, of course, the main thing we're going to take a look at is Karl. It's Karl's last day, so we'll make the most of it here. So here we are, the 5 o'clock advisory with 40-mile-an-hour winds. Southwest at 5 miles an hour. So it's drifting now. And the question is it going to drift over like this, or is it going to go down here? It doesn't really make much difference, honestly, because the system is kind of on its way out. And there is the town, La Ciudad de Campeche in Mexico. And this thing up here, this body of water, is called the Bay of Campeche in English. I don't know. What can I say? Okay, so let's take a look close up and look what's happened here. The cluster of thunderstorms where the heaviest rain is already ashore south of Carmen. Carmen's on this little peninsula thing up to the north here. It's a beautiful kind of resort town there. And you can make out this line through the middle of the tropical storm. Well, tropical storms don't normally have lines through the middle. That's because of the winds pressing in from the north. So here you see the hostile upper level winds blowing across Florida. That's kind of related to that cold front, but they're also pressing in on Karl here, and that's what's pushing everything to the side of Karl and kind of ripping it apart and weakening it. It's going to be a tropical depression here pretty soon. So there's what's left of the cone for Karl, and the idea is it becomes a tropical depression as it comes ashore at Coatzacoalcos, Mexico, which I don't know that town, but anyway, it's going to be a weak system and heavy rain coming in with it. But not as much as thought before because the system is weakening. They're saying a maximum of maybe 7 or 8 inches in some areas. But the mountainous areas here are down to the south. They're in this area here over toward Oaxaca. So this rain is really kind of on the flat areas and on the front side of the mountains, the north side of the mountains where they're going to get it. What's going on with this system? Well, there we are today. You see today, and then you have this flow coming around the high like that, and as we go into tomorrow, it starts to push the system this way, and so it's not going to hang around very long, and that's going to help keep the rain amounts down as high pressure just takes control and the system weakens, and that's that. Okay, over to the other side of the Atlantic, and here's that tropical disturbance number 1, and you say, well, I don't see much there, and there's not much there to see. Actually, it's this cluster of thunderstorms back over here, and the National Hurricane Center only has a 10% chance of that developing. It would have to happen in the next couple of days, but by next week we have hostile upper level winds moving through there, and that'll be that. I love looking at the wide view because you can see so much. There's that disturbance we were just talking about, but look at this dip in the jet stream coming here. That's making the hostile upper level winds, so that means once the disturbance comes up here, it's going to run into that, and that's going to be that. So it has that little window of time. As far as over the U.S., look at the big hump in the jet stream making the heat in the west, and then it dives down into Florida like that. And we'll talk more about that coming up here in just a moment. But we want you to send in your questions. We'll take a look at them as we keep going here. And that big map where we can see the flow around the highs in the west and the lows in the east. Ian and Bridget will be back with more on that, and I'll be back with lots more in just a moment as well. So let's take a break right now. See you back shortly.
The Omaha Steaks semi-annual sale is here. Right now, we're offering 50% off site-wide. The only number that hasn't changed is our 100% guarantee that you'll love every bite. And if you've never tried Omaha Steaks, save an extra $30 with promo code FIRSTTIME. Visit omahasteaks.com/TD today. Why wouldn't you want to save 50% on 100% satisfaction? Just a little smart shopping wisdom from Omaha Steaks.
When you have the Empower card, you don't have to make so many tough decisions in between paychecks, like pushing bald tires just a little farther.
They don't look that bad.
Being your own plumber.
This is a wrench, right?
Or not running the air conditioner on a hot day.
I think I'm melting.
The Empower card gives you cash advance up to $250 with no interest, no late fees, and no credit checks. And with the Empower card, you can even get your paycheck up to 2 days faster and earn up to 10% cash back. Make the right decision. Try the Empower card today. Download the app now.
Have you heard? The United States Mint has issued the Morgan Silver Dollar for the first time in 100 years. Not only that, but they are also minted in 99.9% pure silver for the first time ever in history. Coin experts are calling this an amazing opportunity for anyone that knows the enduring popularity of Morgans. But you must hurry. Only 175,000 legal tender silver dollars were issued. These Morgan Silver Dollars are brand new, bright and shiny legal tender coins minted by the iconic Philadelphia Mint. Just call 1-888-8 1-888-870-6353. And you are guaranteed a new 99.9% pure silver Morgan dollar. The first time in history this has happened. But with limited quantities, you must call now to order. To learn more, call 1-888-870-6353. If you order now, you'll receive a free collector bonus, a $25 value free with every order. Call 1-888-870-6353 now to secure your new Morgan silver dollars before they are gone. That's 1-888-870-6353.
And welcome back to the advisory at 5. Here we are in the middle of October. Tomorrow is the 15th of October. So how many storms or what storms have happened after now? So Greg Diamond, our great weather producer, filling in today, helping out. Anyway, put together this map. Take a look at some of the notable hurricanes that have hit the southeastern U.S. after October 15th, and not just the southeastern U.S., but I want you to look at them in general. I'll talk about a couple of them. One from 2 years ago was Zeta, and you notice it comes up and it turns to the right. All right, how about Wilma? Well, it just kind of mauled Cancun and Cozumel down there, and then it turned to the right. Well, how about Kate in 1985 that just missed Panama City, went right over Tallahassee. It turned to the right. How about Sandy? Well, Sandy came up and turned to the right and then got involved in a goofy jet stream pattern that kind of looped it back this way, and it turned back to the left. So it was a weird one. And Juan came up and it kind of snaked around and eventually kind of turned to the right. So they all kind of turned to the right, right? Well, it takes just the right jet stream pattern, and the general jet stream pattern this time of year is with a dip like this that kind of moves everything to the right as it comes to the north. So, but it takes the right jet stream pattern to make that happen. So that raises the question, what's the jet stream pattern like right now? Let me send it back to Ian and to Bridget.
Yeah, Brian, as you mentioned, this is kind of the funky time of the year where you just showed us beyond October 15th. Those are notorious named storms, very damaging and deadly storms. And we measured snow this morning up across the upper Midwest. So it is that weird intra-seasonal period. And as Brian mentioned, you need that specific circumstance to pull a storm that's in the Gulf of Mexico and drag it off to the north and northeast. We saw that in some of those notorious storms. We do have a dip in the jet stream, but it's not nearly far enough south and into the Gulf of Mexico that it's impacting Karl this time around. Bryan showed you those two steering features, Bridget. It's both of those areas of high pressure on the western and eastern flanks of Karl that thankfully is pushing that south, the opposite direction,
Right.
down into Mexico as a weak system.
It's like the jet stream kind of at a sweet spot for us, not too far south where it's bringing Karl up to the north, but far enough south that we are seeing some of these cold fronts run through Florida. You can see that cold front moving now slowly off to the south of Florida. Eventually, we're going to see a secondary frontal system move through the entire country. And as these fronts clear the Gulf of Mexico, that kind of eliminates the high risk for us to see tropical activity into the very late half of the hurricane season. So it's nice to see this. We're seeing our first big one clearing the Gulf and then calling in for backup as we head into the early portion of next week. So good to see.
Yeah, and I have to say, Brian, bringing you back in, this was a little bit of an uncomfortable time of the year living on the west coast of Florida because fronts are good. You know, it knocks down the humidity. Fronts that sweep through, as you told us, can signal the end of hurricane season. But sometimes this time of the year, when those fronts get hung up over the warm water, that can become a problematic situation. So there's still a lot to watch here in the middle part of October.
Yeah, October is actually the month that you're most likely to get a hurricane in Peninsula Florida. In Tampa, the big hurricane people talk about is the 1921 late in the year storm. Lots of them have moved over Miami from the West Coast late in the year. So it can happen, but this year the overall weather pattern does not look conducive for the second half of October. We'll see, but it doesn't. All right, let's get to your questions that are coming in on Facebook and YouTube. And let me just start with one that I was asked yesterday, actually, is what was the difference between why was Irma and Ian so different? Wasn't Irma a bigger storm? Well, Brian McNulty at the University of Miami made a chart like this, and I want to show you these circles, and you notice every one of those circles. There's an Irma circle at about landfall, and that's the extent of the hurricane force winds. as estimated by the National Hurricane Center. And look at the size of Irma. Now compare that to the size of a circle related to Ian. And you notice Irma was a bigger storm. The energy was spread out over a wider area. Also, though, when it hit Cuba, it had weakened, so it wasn't as strong a storm. But because it was so big on the southeast coast in Miami, it was a very damaging storm in terms of infrastructure and so forth. Over here, you see Dorian and Matthew. Matthew, notice, is kind of oblong because it never got itself reorganized, and because it stayed oblong, that protected the east coast of Florida. With Matthew, it just never completed the circle, so to speak. It's kind of interesting, isn't it, that you see this gap in here? Well, this goes back to 2016. You could actually take this back to 2006, but if you really went back to 2005, then you'd have Katrina coming in this way, and you'd have Irma or Wilma coming in that way, and that would have covered up all of that in Florida. All of Florida would have had hurricane force winds. All right, guys, you've got a couple of questions coming in from some of our viewers on Facebook or YouTube?
Yeah, someone on Facebook and YouTube, this one actually from YouTube, he's asking what would need to happen for atmospheric conditions to become more favorable for hurricanes than they are now. Like we've said, the jet stream not playing a big factor in bringing the current system up to the north, which is good for Florida and the entire Gulf. But what would need to change in the coming days for this situation to change a bit?
Well, the main thing is the jet stream, because what's called the subtropical jet stream, or the southern branch of the jet stream, is screaming across the Gulf of Mexico right now. So no tropical system could survive that. So in order for a tropical system to function, the jet stream has to pull away to the north. The jet stream can't be over top of it. People can tug it north into that area of lighter upper level winds. And we don't see that coming, at least through next week. And as I said, the other kinds of models that we look at that talk about just the general conduciveness of the atmosphere to tropical systems also look not conducive for the rest of October. That's why we're pretty optimistic about the hurricane system, at least around the U.S. Probably it's over. Probably. It's never over till it's over, but probably.
We got our next question in, and this one's a good one. It's about storm surge. We know that storm surge forecasting has improved remarkably over the last couple of decades. It's difficult to measure oftentimes when you get these big storms. The gauges fail. This is from Tracy Argo on YouTube. She's asking, how far did the storm surge go inland with Hurricane Ian in southwest Florida?
Well, the storm surge will go inland until it gets stopped by something. So the river that goes from near Sanibel Island and Fort Myers Beach goes past Cape Karl and then goes to downtown Fort Myers, which is well inland. When they built Fort Myers, it was a fort, right? And they moved it inland to get it away from the hurricanes and not be out there on those marshy islands. And then there was a little town that built up around it. That was a Civil War type time back in the 19th century. But in any case, that's well inland, and the Caloosahatchee River, it's called, goes well past that. So the storm surge that got pushed from the Gulf up the Caloosahatchee, it flooded downtown Fort Myers, and it kept on going. But in places where there is not a river that takes the storm surge inland, or a canal or a bay, like just to the north, you have Charlotte Harbor, which is open, kind of opens to the south. Well, storm surge went in there to some degree, but it didn't have the direct wind flow pushing it in like the wind pushed up the Caloosahatchee River. So it really depends. 10 miles, my guess is it went 10 miles up the Caloosahatchee at least. If you remember Hurricane Laura, which went up by Lake Charles, Louisiana. Lake Charles is 30 miles inland. And if Laura had gone 15 miles to the west, the storm surge would have gone 30 miles inland and flooded downtown Lake Charles. So it really just depends on whether the water has access to the surge. You know, just think of this big kind of push of water coming against the coast. If there's a canal or a river, it's going up that canal or river until something stops it. It's either just kind of runs out of gas, but more likely it's some sort of dam or a town or something that eventually stops the water.
That's just one of the many things that make each tropical system its own entity. It's very difficult to compare tropical systems. Bryan, in the days leading up to Ian's landfall, we talked a lot about angle of approach. It made me think of this when you were showing the wind field from Irma, which was huge. You had practically hurricane conditions occurring simultaneously on the west coast and the east coast of Florida. That was a massive storm, but one that the storm surge didn't end up being a big consideration, in part because of where it went. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, sure. We had storm surge in the Keys. They had a lot of storm surge. It did a tremendous amount of damage down on Big Pine Key because it came over the Keys, but it came over a relatively unpopulated part of the Keys. I know a lot of folks live on Big Pine. It's not like the out in the country or something, but it's not like it was in Key West. Or if the storm had gone 35 miles to the west, we would have had a massive storm surge in Fort Myers Beach and in Naples and in Sanibel. If the center of Irma had gone up, I don't know if you guys can punch up my Max box again, but if we look at Irma here, Irma came and went to the west of Fort Myers and Tampa. So the circulation was pushing the water out, and of course it famously pushed it out of Tampa Bay with the circulation coming around that way. And because it ran into Cuba, it kind of took the long way around, and that got dry air into the circulation. So it never had a strong backside on it. So this side of it here, where the water was pushing in, was weak. The front side was still pretty strong, pushing water out, but it never had a strong back end push, which it could have if it had maintained its circulation. But if it had come just that far offshore, then that side, then we wouldn't have had that weakening, and we would have gotten the push of water all along the coast here on all those coastal communities, including Tampa. And the difference in Southwest Florida was about 35 miles in a shift. And of course, we couldn't really predict that a couple days out. We just can't, you don't have that kind of certainty. That's why there was so much angst and worry there on the Southwest coast.
Yeah, that fine-tuning can make all the difference. And we have actually one more question for you, an international question. This is also from YouTube, from Mouse YT. And she's asking, did Toronto get the remnants of Ian? We were talking about rain widespread last week, a week after Ian hit for the East Coast and then up north. A lot of people are wondering, is this all because of Ian?
That's a good question. As there's so much concentration on the Southwest coast there, obviously it went across and then it went north. I don't know. Do you guys know the answer to that? That's a really interesting question. There is a famous hurricane, by the way, Hurricane Hazel in 1954, that was sort of the hurricane of record for the Wilmington area in North Carolina. And it turned out to be a tremendous rainstorm. Hundreds of people died in Toronto from the remnants of that storm. But I don't know. I'm going to look it up now, and I appreciate the question.
Yeah, when we were tracking it last week after Ian, we were talking about, it's not necessarily remnants from Ian, but rather kind of the push of the tropical moisture that supplied some of that rain. So it's a little bit of a correlation, but maybe not direct.
It was a separate system, less remnants, more enhancement, we'll call it. But yeah, they all played a part, and that's part of what we were talking about, the connection between what's going on in the higher latitudes and the tropics. Bryan, thank you very much. It's going to do it for the Advisory at 5. Thanks to everybody in our social audience for joining us. Fox Weather Across America has more of your top weather stories when we come right back.
I have, over my 30 years, seen many patients who have excessive sweating. It is very much a confidence killer. Excessive sweating is not something you have to live with. I recommend Carpe for my patients.
Carpe is by far the most effective antiperspirant I've ever used.
I love Carpe. Now I don't sweat.
Effective